First of all, this is big news because this is the first time in well over 50 years that the Kenya music market, small as it is going to be directly connected to the global market on a one-to-one basis. And this hasn't happened since the late 70s when the local labels used to be connected to the global labels either by subsidiary contracts or some other way. That connection is important because that's what enabled music done by Daudi Kabaka in Nairobi.
Helule lule ya baba, helule nyolanga itabu. Helule lule ya baba, helule nyolanga itabu. Nifanye nini ndugu sosi? Helule nirudi kwetu. Nifanye nini ndugu sosi? Helule nirudi kwetu.
To be covered by the Tremolos in the UK.
Every way.
And that's how come you can make money across this huge world. You have to remember that music is technically an FMCG product. You make money on small margins, but you make money at volume. For you to be able to do that, you need scale. Record labels and huge global markets provide that scale. The guys in the 60s and 70s, Kina Kabaka, always had access to that market, but their money was stolen by the white-owned labels. That's a story for another day. And since the labels left Kenya in the early 1980s, late 70s, there hasn't really been a competent connection between this industry and the global industry as a whole. We've tried smaller connections, but it's never really worked. So this entry by Spotify directly into Kenya is probably the biggest news for this industry that I have heard in my lifetime. First of all the other apps that have come here have never really onshored the entire music ecosystem. Apple Music only onshored the consumer side, and so did Deezer. Spotify seemed to be onshoring A&R, so they hired somebody to be their A&R lead for this region. They also seem to be connecting to the local infrastructure, for instance, the M-Pesa integration. That's huge. It gives the consumers in this market access to that music industry directly through a financial system that is from here. So that's a huge thing. Previous apps didn't really do that, and it was really complicated. Secondly, they also seem to be interested in onshoring some distribution services. I'm aware that they're currently looking for somebody who's going to give them advice on IP. That's fantastic because alignment of the Spotify platform IP policy with Kenya's IP policy is really, really critical. That's the only way we can protect the creators in Kenya. It's the only way that that market can be useful to the people who are making music in this space. So I'm happy that that's happening. That's also big, big news. And I hope that they can keep doing that. Because we want this industry to make the most out of this connection to the global market. For example, you remember that Spotify and Drake collaborated to make one of the most streamed songs of all time, right? Because it's an exclusive release, it's kind of a special thing. It happened only on Spotify. This really drove up the numbers. That type of connection to our musicians is something that's really critical. I hope that this is available for this industry because it gives us a very good opportunity to make some really big money. In short, if I remember correctly, you need 229 streams to make $1. That's not really a great thing, so hopefully Spotify can maybe review that in the future because that's kind of bad. We've kind of been existing outside of the music industry proper, which means that our industry has been informal, which then also means that we don't really have a functional industry. By that I mean you don't have like promoters, pluggers, record labels, artists, stylists, vocal producers. That kind of role-based industry hasn't really grown in Kenya because of the informal nature in which we're operating. So we find that a lot of times in Kenya, the musician is a guy who is everything, and he tries to kind of just survive by making all these things happen, including being his own promoter. Now, that means that even the type of data that we are dealing with in Kenya is never really properly mapped out. Now, Spotify's introduction connects us to the global industry, which then gives us hope. Because remember, this is the biggest digital platform probably in the history of the world. So it's going to force all of us to get better. Our game will go up. Our role sort in the industry will get better. People will begin to specialize at the work that they do. And that means that they will get better at that work, which improves the entire ecosystem. This is why it's critical for Spotify to actually onshore some of that ecosystem stuff. If they can begin to bring some services and make them available to local companies, either for bidding or to help local companies build that capacity, that will be a huge thing for this industry. It will probably make our industry much better in the next 10 years. Right now, if you want to get your music on Spotify, you have to use a subsidiary distributor or a second-level distributor. Usually, those types of guys are in France or in the UK or in the States or somewhere in the global north. If these guys can onshore or empower some local aggregators, it means that we can actually have companies located in Kenya distributing directly to Spotify, which means that the ecosystem is going to be making more money. And it also makes it easier for artists over here to get on Spotify. None of the other big tech companies that have come to Kenya have actually tried this, and I hope that Spotify would be the first one. Story time. MCSK previously tried to connect this industry to the global industry. But what they did, because they're really, really bad people, in my opinion, is they sold their entire catalog to a third-party distributor who's based in California. That third-party distributor then sold the entire catalog onwards to several music distributors, including the Orchard, Sony, blah, 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 and all the way to Spotify. So right now, when you go to all these big music platforms, you'll find Kenya music that's there, and that the MCSK is listed as a publisher, which in my opinion is illegal because MCSK is supposed to work as a CMO, not as a record label. Anyway, a lot of that music that was put on those platforms was incorrectly credited. In some cases, the music was actually distributed under different artist names from the names that the artists really use. So as a result, people's credits have been erased. Basically, their copyright has been lost. It's difficult for you to pay rights for a song when the credits don't show who actually owns the song. Now, for us to solve this problem, we would have to start a legal or a corrective proceedings against the distributor, right? But here's the catch. I understand that the distributor that MCSK sold the music to, who's in California, was either bought out or went out of business. So right now, there's actually no way to solve that problem for the musicians that are have their music on these platforms because MCSK did such a bond-headed thing. And I'm telling that story so that I can explain why it's important for these services to be onshored. Because we have the local knowledge, we have the context knowledge, we also have the legal knowledge, and we can kind of go to the nuts and bolts of who owns a song. So it's important that this entry is accompanied by some onshoring of these services, because then we'll be able to solve these types of problems or maybe avoid them altogether in the future. Let's kind of take a look at the 80s, right? In the 80s, we had a huge renaissance of Kenyan musicians as our industry was kind of beginning to get influences from outside and our sound was changing. And in that time, we created not one, but 4 bands that went gold. They sold enough records to be actually certified gold. However, in the history of global music history, our gold records don't exist. So this means that the money or even the momentum that these artists had generated in the 80s was not something they could use when they went outside of Kenya. For example, the Mushrooms went gold, but their work is so forgotten by the world that even when Disney stole their IP, they didn't have a leg to stand on. And right now they're still chasing Disney for their IP. And for your information, the IP that Disney stole was the IP to Hakuna Matata, which was originally written by the Mushrooms. Consider this. The world respects the artist formerly known as Prince as having one of the largest musical discographies in history. He's known to have recorded somewhere between 500 and 1,000 songs, looking like 950. But to put it in context, Joseph Kamaru is known to have recorded well over 1,300 songs. But the work that Joseph Kamaru did is invisible because Joseph Kamaru was never connected to the global industry. So he never had the opportunity to really export his sound or kind of work with international acts and grow his market. So as a result, he ended up becoming a pastor, and he did other things, and the rest is history. For this generation, our generation, this is a great opportunity. If the platform is going to work with us ethically, and if we're going to work with the local regulatory environment to make sure that the creators in this context are protected, there's an opportunity here for us to take, and I hope that we can raise our game and get ready to take over this world. A lot of them have always come in through the consumer side. So they only kind of provide the services, take all the money out of the ecosystem and disappear. And they don't give us a proper shot at making money on the platform. For example, YouTube doesn't give us the same CPM rates locally as they give US users or even users in Europe. I'm really hopeful that Spotify is not going to play that type of game here. And I hope that even to go further, they can begin to offer some kind of ethical approach to revenue shares. What do I mean? Would Spotify consider keeping majority of the revenues raised within this market, Kenyan market, in the Kenyan ecosystem? So maybe give the Kenyan ecosystem a larger share of the revenues, just so that we can kind of plow it back into the ecosystem and grow it. This is critical because our music market is not going to be as big as the other music markets. And if the revenue split is kind of just the same, then we will never really have an opportunity to grow, because we can't compete with aggregators that are in France who've been doing this much longer than us. So I would say if there's any opportunity for some ethical management of revenues gained in this, Spotify should really explore that and give these emerging markets a chance to grow by plowing back a lot of the revenue that's grown in these spaces back into this ecosystem. Hire locals as much as possible. The Kenyan music industry is probably the most complex music industry you're going to be working in. I know because I've studied it for a long time and because I also work in this industry for a long time, and it still confuses me. So, best of luck to you guys. Karibuni Kenya. I hope that this is the beginning of a wonderful friendship.